Welcome to Moonlight Stories, where mysteries unfold beneath velvet skies, and truth is whispered only to those who dare listen. Tonight, we journey into the heart of 1930s Paris, a city of light, laughter, and lethal secrets. A soirée of elegance will turn to scandal, a toast to tragedy. And only one man can untangle the silken lies beneath the crystal chandeliers. This is Hercule Poirot, Death at the Crystal Soirée. Before we step into the mystery, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. It's always a joy to see our storytelling circle grow from every corner of the world. Now, get yourself something warm to sip on. Tea, cocoa, or something a little stronger if the mood calls for it. Settle in, and let's begin. Chapter 1. Midnight in Paris. Paris, December 31st, 1937. The city glistened beneath a crystalline sky, where flakes of snow drifted softly through gaslit streets, and the hum of celebration curled from the corners of smoky cafes. The Seine gleamed like a ribbon of silk beneath the bridges, and the distant toll of bells mingled with a quiet clink of champagne flutes and laughter. On this final night of the year, the capital of elegance shimmered with promise, cloaked in mystery. But nowhere in the city was the glow more golden, the expectations more grand, than at the Hôtel du Palais Garnier, where the prestigious crystal soirée unfolded with meticulous grace. The annual gala was a sanctuary of silk and scandal, drawing aristocrats, patrons of the arts, and society's most curious enigmas. And this year, among the jeweled gowns and white-tie perfection, a singular figure commanded quiet attention: Hercule Poirot. He arrived with neither fanfare nor entourage. The snow clung to the edges of his tailored overcoat, and his gloved hands adjusted the brim of his hat with characteristic precision. Compact, dapper, and thoroughly self-contained, Poirot moved with the confidence of a man who noticed everything and revealed nothing. The doormen recognized him immediately, their expressions shifting from courtesy to awe as they ushered him through the marbled foyer into the luminous core of the event. The ballroom of the Palais Garnier had been transformed into a cathedral of light. Hundreds of candles danced in mirrored sconces, and chandeliers rained crystal sparkles onto guests below. The floor pulsed with the gentle rhythm of a string quartet nestled beneath a domed alcove. The air, tinged with lavender and tobacco, hummed with expectation. This evening was not simply a celebration, it was a performance. And every attendee, a player on a private stage. At the epicenter of attention stood the evening's crown jewel, Madame Evelyne Charpentier. Once the reigning voice of the Paris opera, now reclusive and rarely seen, Evelyne had chosen this night for her return to public life. Rumors of her appearance had stirred the city into a frenzy, yet no one truly expected her to attend, not until she entered the ballroom with all the silence and gravity of a snowfall. She was draped in silver satin, her figure statuesque, her presence imposing. Around her neck rested 3 ropes of flawless pearls, and beneath the curve of her dark lashes, her eyes scanned the room with the cool detachment of a queen surveying her court. To the world, she appeared invincible, but to the eyes that watched without blinking, the eyes of Hercule Poirot, there was something else. Beneath her poise trembled the faint, invisible threads of fear. Trailing behind her was Armand Lefebvre, her former husband, whose wealth was eclipsed only by his reputation for bitterness. His smile, though ever present, failed to reach his eyes. Nearby, Isadora Quinn, a brilliant young soprano with eyes like razors, followed the diva's every movement with a hunger too intense to be polite. The famed General Walter Grun, stiff and silent, clutched a glass of scotch with military rigidity. Lucien Devereux, the scandal sheet journalist, circled like a vulture in a velvet jacket. And finally, Celeste Marchand, the hotel's elegant, exhausted hostess orchestrated the event with the precision of a woman hiding behind perfection. As the hour neared midnight, the atmosphere thickened. The music softened. Guests formed rings of conversation that pulsed with secrets. Poirot observed it all from a discreet vantage, sipping nothing, smiling rarely. He had been invited out of courtesy, but his presence always meant something more. He never attended an event without noting who smiled too eagerly, who drank too deeply, and who watched without watching. Just before the stroke of 12, Evelyne ascended the low stage at the head of the room. Her silver gown shimmered like liquid moonlight under the spotlight. She lifted a crystal flute of champagne and addressed the crowd with poise. Her toast was elegant, restrained. She raised her glass to the year behind and the year ahead, to love lost and found, to art and to memory. The room lifted their glasses in unison, and Evelyne brought hers delicately to her lips. Then she faltered. Her fingers trembled. Her throat constricted. Her knees softened. The flute fell from her grasp, shattered on the marble floor, and a single gasp escaped her lips before her body followed, collapsing in silence. For a moment, the room held its breath. And then chaos bloomed. Guests surged forward, some crying out, others frozen. The hotel staff rushed to surround her. But Hercule Poirot did not move. His gaze remained fixed, not on the fallen diva, but on the fragments of glass and the puddle of golden liquid that glistened beside her. The doctor arrived swiftly. The examination was brief. Evelyne Charpentier was declared dead. A heart attack, they suggested. A tragic, untimely collapse. The result of age or emotion or the toll of performing. But Poirot did not accept coincidence. He noted the scent of bitter almonds rising from the champagne. A ghostly trace, faint yet unmistakable. Cyanide. A kiss of death wrapped in effervescence. The doors were locked. The guests, uneasy and murmuring, were detained. From celebrants, they had become suspects. Poirot moved among them, a silent observer in patent leather shoes. He noted who wept too freely, who remained too composed. He marked the eyes that avoided his gaze and the hands that shook with something more than shock. In the shadows of the grand ballroom, beneath the crystal rain of chandeliers, a killer moved unseen. The crystal soirée, intended as a final toast to elegance, had transformed into a stage for murder. And Hercule Poirot, without speaking a word to the crowd, began his most delicate investigation. Chapter 2. The Locked Room. The doors had closed with the softness of velvet, but the finality of iron. The great ballroom of the Palais Garnier had become, in an instant, both cradle and cage, a sanctum of glamour turned site of suspicion. Outside, the snow continued to fall in silence, indifferent to the sudden stillness within. Midnight had passed, but the night had only just begun. Hercule Poirot stood motionless near the towering candelabras that flanked the stage. His eyes, twin slivers of steel beneath arched brows, surveyed the room with a meticulous calm. The great detective knew one thing with certainty: murder, once committed, is not a vanishing act. It leaves echoes, smudges, gaps in logic waiting to be mended. The guests, once jubilant, now stood as living sculptures, immobile and uncertain, caught between decorum and dread. They had all seen her fall. They had all heard the glass shatter. But what they had seen and what they had understood was seldom the same. Poirot's voice, when he finally spoke, was soft but absolute. He addressed Celeste Marchand first, the hostess whose pearl-studded heels barely touched the ground as she approached him. Her mask of composure had begun to crack, like frost on glass. He instructed her to seal the exits, not out of accusation, but of necessity. Until the truth could be uncovered, no one would leave. The hotel staff complied with urgency and a hint of fear. From valet to violinist, Each knew that the evening had slipped into legend, and legend, in Poirot's experience, often carried a body count. Poirot requested that the guests be escorted to the adjoining salon, a gilded chamber bathed in amber light. There, chairs were arranged in a wide crescent, allowing him to observe each guest without obstruction. He needed to see their posture, their glances, the tremble of fingers. In silence, much could be revealed. The body of Madame Evelyne Charpentier had been removed discreetly to the drawing-room, a quiet space shielded from view. A physician remained beside her, brow furrowed with questions he dared not speak aloud. Poirot had already noted the faint scent on the broken glass. He did not need a coroner to tell him what he already believed. The diva had not died naturally. He began his observations not with questions, but with presence. Poirot, unlike the police who would surely arrive soon, did not begin with interrogations. He let the silence do the work. People filled silence with guilt. Armand Lefebvre sat with arms crossed, his jaw clenched in calculation rather than sorrow. Beside him, Isadora Quinn dabbed at her eyes with a lace kerchief that showed no dampness. Her performance was too careful. General Grun remained statuesque, his expression locked in military indifference. Lucien Devereux scribbled furiously in a pocket notebook, no doubt documenting quotes he would later embellish. And Celeste, still fluttering between roles of hostess and prisoner, could barely meet Poirot's gaze. Only one guest showed no desire to hide. Madame Renata Bellamy, a dowager countess known for her sharp wit and blunt tongue, regarded Poirot with cool curiosity. She was poisoned, wasn't she? She said aloud, breaking the silence like a wineglass struck too hard. It would be just like Evelyne to die dramatically. There was a nervous ripple among the guests. Poirot offered only a tilt of his head in response. Renata had spoken what many suspected, but her candor served another purpose. It forced the masks to shift. Now, Poirot moved. With a slow, deliberate pace, he crossed the room, not addressing the guests directly, but inspecting objects instead. The champagne tray, the flute, the bottle, now set aside and untouched, as though it too had become a suspect. The glasses had been identical in design, but Evelyne's had been passed to her by a waiter whose name no one could recall. That was curious. Poirot beckoned the head butler, a tall, linen-clad man named Henri, whose memory for service bordered on the photographic. The waiter in question had disappeared immediately after the collapse. Not rushed, not frantic, simply absent, as if erased. A member of the catering staff never known by name. Simply a body in a uniform. That, too, was curious. He had slipped through the seams of the soirée. Poirot turned his attention next to the seating chart. The arrangement of guests was always telling. Proximity was motive's shadow. Evelyne had chosen her table companions with care. Armand sat to her right, Isadora to her left. Across from her, the General and Lucien. Celeste had flitted between tables but returned often to this one. Each had means to touch the glass, the bottle, or the tray. And then there were the servants. Poirot moved through the corridors behind the ballroom, into the staff hallways. He studied the layout of the kitchens, the staging areas, the service routes. Everything moved with precision, and yet there was room for manipulation. One door, near the supply alcove, led to an exterior stairwell. It had not been locked. From there, one could vanish into the Paris night unnoticed. Returning to the salon, Poirot stood once more before the guests. He offered no accusation, only this. You see, Ms. Amos, murder does not occur in isolation. It is born of reason, shaped by history, and carried out in opportunity. It is a puzzle made not only of evidence, but of people. They looked back at him with silence. And in that silence, Poirot felt it again, the fracture in the room. Not just grief, not just fear, but anticipation. Somewhere among these polished shoes and lacquered nails, someone waited for the moment to breathe easier. He would not give them that moment. Instead, Poirot announced a simple truth. The police had been summoned, but he would speak with each guest before their arrival. Not in order to accuse, but to understand. There was a web of tension stretched across this room, and he intended to pluck each strand. One by one, the guests would be called. But not tonight. Tonight, Hercule Poirot would simply observe. Watch the way hands fidgeted with cufflinks. How glances shifted at the sound of a name. How silence could say more than any confession. The crystal soirée was no longer a celebration. It was a locked room, and inside it, a murder awaited. Chapter 3. The Portrait of the Dead. Morning in Paris came reluctantly. The pale light crept over the boulevards as if uncertain whether it should disturb the hush that had descended during the night. At the Hôtel du Palais Garnier, a shroud of silence lingered over its high windows and gilded corridors. The grand ballroom, once a theatre of elegance, now stood empty, save for the memory of Evelyne Charpentier's final breath. In a small drawing room on the second floor, away from the disquieted whispers of the detained guests, Hercule Poirot sat beside a tall window, hands folded in perfect symmetry on the table before him. The frost had etched delicate ferns on the glass panes, and the Seine glimmered like a vein of quicksilver far below. It was not a view he admired. It was a vantage point he measured. Before him lay three objects: a silver-framed photograph of Evelyne Charpentier in her youth, a menu from the soirée, and the broken stem of a champagne flute. Each was a fragment, each a symbol, and each, Poirot believed, a path to understanding the woman who had died and the person who had ensured it. Death, to Poirot, was never an end. It was a portrait, a carefully composed image. And so, he began to study the portrait of Evelyne Charpentier. She had been a woman of extraordinary talent. Her voice, once likened to spun gold, had filled opera houses across Europe. But her fame had not been merely the product of artistry. It had been cultivated, controlled. She was a woman who had mastered silence as well as song. Her retirement, sudden and unexplained, had become the subject of speculation, then myth. And now, her return had lasted mere hours. Poirot asked the staff to prepare the guest library as a private interviewing space. The shelves, lined with ancient volumes and first editions, offered a quiet enclosure for what must come next. The guests, still under the weight of the previous night's transformation, had retreated to their suites or to the breakfast salon, where conversation drifted like ash. He called the first of them without preface, Armand Lefebvre. The man arrived with a firm step, his hair still immaculate, though his eyes bore the discoloration of sleeplessness. He did not sit until Poirot motioned, and even then, he remained rigid. They spoke not of the death at first, but of the past. Armand, it emerged, had not seen Evelyne in over a year prior to the soirée. Their marriage had crumbled under the weight of her career, her pride, and what he called her romantic imagination. Yet it was clear he still felt the ghost of her presence deeply, resentment preserved like a fossil. He denied any knowledge of her plans to return to public life. When Poirot mentioned the seating arrangement, Armand gave only a short nod. She insisted on it, he said. As always. Poirot asked about Isidora Quinn. Armand's lip curled slightly, a gesture that did not go unnoticed. Young, ambitious, she made no effort to hide her desire to replace Evelyne. Not just in music, in everything. Poirot said nothing more and let Armand leave. Next came Isidora. She arrived wearing a deep burgundy robe, her hair unbrushed but her posture carefully rehearsed. She sat as one expecting to be photographed. When she spoke, her voice was soft, breathy, calculated. Evelyne was a goddess to me. I worshipped her, she said. But Poirot watched her hands. How they never stopped moving. how they fidgeted with the embroidery of her sleeve. She recounted Evelyne's compliments to her at rehearsals, their late-night conversations about performance, about legacy. But when Poirot inquired about the champagne, Isadora hesitated only a fraction too long. "She poured her own," she said. "I didn't touch it." But the waiter had poured the glass. Poirot noted the inconsistency. He asked her if Evelyne had enemies. "Everyone adored her," she said. But Poirot was unconvinced. He let her go. Next came General Walthergrun. He arrived precisely at the appointed time, in a pressed uniform that seemed untouched by sleep. He saluted Poirot, unnecessarily, then sat without waiting for instruction. He was terse, dry, unmovable. He claimed he had come to the soirée out of respect for Madame Charpentier's service to culture. Poirot questioned him on his placement at the table. "Assigned. I made no requests." "Did he drink the champagne?" "One glass. Not memorable." "Did he speak to Evelyne during the evening?" "Only pleasantries." Poirot, unperturbed by the brevity, pressed gently about the war, the old accusations that had followed Grun in certain French newspapers. Grun's face did not change. "I was cleared. Thoroughly." "OUI," said Poirot. "But the past leaves stains, does it not?" Grun said nothing further. He was dismissed. Celeste Marchand followed. The weight of the night had settled upon her. She looked older, wearier, her makeup worn and uneven. She tried to smile but failed. "I wanted the evening to be perfect," she said. "Evelyne's return was a gift. I thought it would bring her joy." Poirot asked her how the champagne had been arranged. "We had 6 bottles prepared for the toast. All identical. Vintage Veuve Clicquot." "Who uncorked them?" "Henri, our sommelier. But he delegated the actual pouring to the staff. I trusted them." "Did she know all the waiters?" "She hesitated. Most, but will hired extra help through an agency. Names? I'd have to check." Poirot's brow arched. "Then do so." She was dismissed. The final guest was Lucien Devereux. He entered the library like a man attending his own book launch, flamboyant, amused, and utterly unshaken. "I must say, Poirot, what a story," he grinned. "Tragic, of course, but so very operatic." Poirot said nothing. Lucien admitted he had come seeking gossip, exclusives, perhaps even blackmail material, but not murder. When asked about Evelyne, he waved a dismissive hand. A talent, yes, but distant, cold. She alienated more people than she loved. He did not cry. He did not mourn. Poirot asked one last question. "Were you near her glass before the toast?" Lucien smiled. "Close enough to admire it, not close enough to touch it." Poirot thanked him. Left alone once more, Poirot stood at the center of the library, where the silence had begun to speak to him. Evelyne Charpentier had not been killed in a moment of rage. Her murder had been planned, performed, even. And like any performance, it had a script. There was a motive buried in history. Perhaps in love, perhaps in legacy. But it had been poured into a glass and handed to a woman who knew how to command attention. Poirot turned to the photograph once more. In it, Evelyne smiled with a mystery she had taken to her grave. But Hercule Poirot would uncover it. Chapter 4. Shadows Beneath the Chandelier. Night once again descended upon Paris, wrapping the city in velvet blue. The glow of the Eiffel Tower cast its golden net across the skyline. But at the Hotel du Palais Garnier, light could not reach the corners darkened by suspicion. In the hours since Evelyne Charpentier's death, the glittering ballroom had been reduced to a hushed relic, a monument to interruption. The shattered crystal flute had been swept away, but Poirot knew that no true clue was ever truly discarded. Echoes lingered, and in silence, truths whispered. Poirot remained in the hotel, occupying a suite he had not intended to use. He had unpacked nothing but a single notebook and a hairbrush, symmetrical, naturally. At his small writing desk, he sat composing thought lines rather than conclusions. The facts were stubborn. The motives, veiled. The killer, still among them. The staff, now under subtle watch, continued to serve meals and polish floors, but tension buzzed like a trapped fly in every corridor. The remaining guests moved like ghosts, wrapped in silk robes and uncertain glances. Conversations were clipped. Doors were locked. Even laughter had lost its place. Poirot began the day not with suspects, but with the scene itself. He returned to the ballroom at sunrise, entering alone. The chandeliers above, now dimmed, resembled inverted trees of ice. He moved with precision, eyes combing the space for geometry, not glamour. It was not what had changed since Evelyne's fall that intrigued him. It was what had stayed the same. The table, untouched since last night, had been cordoned off. Poirot noted every position, every chair, every glass, the exact orientation of silver cutlery, the faint outline where Evelyne's clutch had rested beside her plate. He measured distances with his eye, the angle from her glass to the stage, the time it would take for a waiter to walk from the service alcove to her seat. It was not enough to ask who might have had motive. Poirot wished to know who had the nerve, and, more importantly, who had the time. Back in the service alcove, he found Henri, the sommelier, in conference with a hotel manager. The man wore the exhaustion of guilt, though no accusation had yet been spoken aloud. "I tasted each bottle before they were served," Henri said. "A drop, as always. None were off. None were bitter." Poirot nodded slowly. "You tasted from the bottle, not the flute." Henri blinked. "Naturally." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Then we must consider a more surgical insertion of the poison. A single flute, one moment, one gap in attention." He requested a list of every waiter hired from the agency that night. There had been 8. 6 known to the hotel. 2 new. Names, addresses, and work histories were compiled. Poirot dispatched Inspector Gerard, a trusted contact in the Paris police, to begin quiet background checks. No alarms. No headlines. He returned to his suite and waited. Not for inspiration, but for opportunity. It arrived that afternoon. Celeste Marchand approached him in the atrium, drawn and trembling. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, lowering her voice, "I received something strange. Left at my door." She handed him a note. Handwritten. No signature. It read. She kept the letters. She always kept everything. Not for love. For control. Poirot turned it over. No watermark. Slight perfume. Violet. The kind worn by only one woman at the soirée, Isadora Quinn. But handwriting could be forged, and perfume could be planted. Poirot knew better than to be led by the nose. Still, the reference to letters intrigued him. He asked Celeste directly, was Evelyne known to archive her personal correspondence? Celeste hesitated. She had a storage room in the basement. A private one. Old costumes, sheet music, press clippings. "I believe, letters, yes." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "I would like to see it. Now." Together they descended a narrow staircase to a locked room below the staff level. Celeste produced a brass key, her fingers trembling as she opened the door. Inside, the air was dry, heavy with dust and the scent of mothballs. The room was large, part archive, part shrine. Costumes from famous operas were hung with care in glass cases. A shelf held playbills in pristine condition. But it was the cedar trunk in the far corner that drew Poirot. Inside were hundreds of envelopes, neatly stacked, some tied with silk ribbons, others sealed with wax. He selected one at random. The letter was from Armand, dated 10 years prior. It dripped with admiration, veiled pain, and desperate longing. Another was from Lucien Devereux, a draft of an unpublished gossip column hinting at an affair between Evelyne and a married patron of the arts. Another, unsigned, included a clipped lock of hair. Chilling. Poirot reviewed a dozen more. One, written in delicate slanted cursive, was from a woman named M. The letter suggested blackmail. If you will not pay, I will reveal everything. You cannot silence the truth. Poirot returned to the perfume note. The connection became clearer. Someone feared the past was about to be unearthed. Evelyne's return had not merely rekindled admiration. It had stirred buried threats. Back in his room, Poirot arranged the letters like cards in a game of patience. He mapped out timelines, cross-referenced handwriting, even traced the scent lingering on several envelopes. It was not violet after all. It was mimosa. Subtle, old-fashioned, a detail often overlooked. Mimosa had once been the signature scent of only one woman Poirot had encountered years ago. A woman known for her disguises. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Poirot was interrupted by a knock. Inspector Gerard returned. The waiter, Paul Garnier, the new hire, he said, is vanished. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Vanished? How? He never returned home. No luggage. No contact. His agency has no recent photo. We found his name on one of the champagne trays. Poirot tapped his fingers on the desk. Then we are not merely looking for a killer. We are looking for a ghost. Gerard nodded gravely. Poirot looked once more at the shattered crystal flute in his mind's eye. A single moment, a single substitution, had ended a life. But perhaps, just perhaps, the intended victim had not been Evelyne at all. Perhaps the true motive lay not in her fame or secrets, but in mistaken identity. And so, he returned to the guest list, to each face, to each chair, and to the possibility that the wrong woman had died. Chapter 5. The Portrait and the Poisoner. The morning following the waiter's disappearance began not with clarity, but with fog. A thick, silent haze crawled along the Seine and across the balconies of the Hôtel du Palais Garnier, wrapping Paris in a cloak of spectral gray. It was a morning made for introspection and uncertainty, an atmosphere that Hercule Poirot knew was no accident. The weather, like people, could sometimes be persuaded to mirror motive. He sat alone in the lounge, savoring a pot of chocolate thick enough to hold the spoon upright. His mind, however, was far from indulgent. The absence of Paul Garnier, the vanishing waiter, remained the most uncooperative element in an increasingly elaborate puzzle. And now, with the introduction of anonymous threats and the scent of mimosa clinging to old letters, the threads that Poirot had begun to weave into neat order threatened to tangle once again. Poirot turned his thoughts to portraits. Portraits not of paint and canvas, but of character. What image did each guest project, and what might each of them be desperate to hide? He began with Armand Lefebvre, the former husband, wealthy, bitter, and, some whispered, ruined by Evelyne's decision to leave him at the height of her career. Yet when Poirot observed Armand on the night of the soirée, his bitterness seemed faded, tired, not fiery, and his gaze had not followed Evelyne's movements with longing or rage, but with an odd detachment. The embers were cold. Poirot visited Armand that morning in the breakfast room, where the man sat alone with toast and the Financial Times. When asked about Evelyne's letters, Armand neither denied nor confirmed them. He simply said, "We were two performers on different stages, monsieur. The audience applauded her louder, but I never left the wings." Cryptic, but not damning. Poirot moved next to General Walthegron. The retired Prussian officer had spent most of the soirée rigid and silent, his attention divided between the bar and Evelyne's movements. His reputation, however, spoke louder than he did. Decorated, disciplined, and deeply conservative. Rumors connected him with secret financial support for Evelyne's early operatic tours. Patronage, certainly, but perhaps more. Poirot invited him for a walk through the hotel's interior conservatory. Among the orchids and misted palms, Poirot asked gently, "Did you love her, General?" The old man stopped, his cane gripped tightly. "I did once," he said. "But love, it has an expiration." She returned it unopened. Did she know the price of that refusal? Grun's jaw clenched. She knew everything. That was her curse. Poirot inclined his head. A declaration, or warning. The distinction, as always, was fine. That afternoon, Poirot revisited the archive in the basement, where Celeste Marchand had permitted him continued access. He was not alone. To his mild surprise, Lucien Devereux was already there, flipping through old playbills and notes with mock reverence. "Curious place for a gossip columnist," Poirot remarked. Lucien smiled with practiced charm. "I collect the echoes of genius, monsieur. Even in death, Evelyne makes for excellent copy." Poirot did not smile. "You were once very close to her, I believe." "Close is an illusion. She tolerated me. I adored her, like a loyal dog." Poirot tilted his head. "And dogs are known to bite when betrayed." Lucien's face twitched, just slightly. After he left, Poirot resumed his examination of the letters. Among them, he found a peculiar envelope, one postmarked from Marseille, dated barely a month before Evelyne's death. It contained a single sentence: "You promised. I'm still waiting." The signature was a flourish of initials, CL. Poirot stayed at them for several minutes. Not a known guest, not a known friend, but the handwriting. It tugged at the edge of memory. Delicate, precise, almost musical. He sought out Isadora Quinn that evening. The young soprano had remained quiet, observant, gliding between guests with a gaze too sharp for comfort. She agreed to speak in the music room, an intimate chamber with a single grand piano and heavy red curtains. Poirot watched as she traced her fingers along the keys, not playing, merely touching. She confessed to envy. Admiration turned sour. Evelyne had been her idol, until she became her rival. "She feared me," Isadora said, softly. "She heard me rehearse at the opera house. Said my voice was too dangerous." "Were you?" Isadora's eyes flared. "To her legacy, perhaps." Poirot asked, "Did you ever write her?" She blinked. "Only once. A foolish letter. I never sent it." "About what?" Isadora looked away, begging for her mentorship, or maybe her approval. "I can't remember." But Poirot remembered, and it was not approval Evelyne had received. It was a threat, from someone who believed a promise had been made and broken. Poirot retired early, but his mind did not rest. He pieced together the mental portraits now forming a gallery in his mind. Armand, the bitter observer. Grun, the wounded romantic. Lucien, the betrayed acolyte. Isadora, the shadow successor. Celeste, the gatekeeper, and the missing waiter. Paul Garnier, a ghost who had entered, delivered death, and vanished. But now, a new possibility took form. What if Garnier was not the poisoner? What if Garnier had witnessed the poisoning and disappeared out of fear? Or, most chilling of all, what if Garnier had never existed? Poirot called for Inspector Gerard, requested every known agency that had been involved with staffing the soirée, demanded documentation, contracts, application forms, signatures, photographs. By midnight, Gerard returned. "There's no Paul Garnier in any agency records. Not from our sources. Not anyway." Poirot folded his hands. So, the killer not only slipped poison into a glass under the eyes of Parisian society, but constructed a phantom to deliver it. He stood and walked slowly to the large window. The fog still clung to the glass, erasing the skyline. Poirot whispered to himself, a phantom waiter, a poisoned glass, a past littered with betrayal, and a portrait of a woman who kept everything, even the wrong promises. Then he turned. This was never a crime of opportunity, mon ami, he told Gerard. This was staged with opera's precision. This was performance. And with that, Poirot vowed he would uncover the final act. Chapter 6. The curtain rises again. The day after the revelation that no record of Paul Garnier existed, Hercule Poirot awoke with a peculiar sense of purpose. It was not clarity, precisely, but alignment, a conviction that the threads of motive, performance, and deception were beginning to twist into a pattern. The crystal soirée, with all its sparkle and grandeur, had been nothing more than the prologue to something far more calculated. Poirot dressed in his most modest grey suit and stood for a full minute before the mirror, inspecting his reflection with the same scrutiny he offered his suspects. He adjusted his tie not once but thrice. Then he nodded. For today was not a day for dramatics. Today was a day for quiet revelation. Downstairs in the drawing room, Inspector Gerard waited with fresh documents in hand. The agency files had been triple-checked, and Poirot had requested transcripts of the security footage from the rear entrances of the Hôtel du Palais Garnier. They revealed a singular detail. No one matching the waiter's appearance had entered through the back staff entrance. Not on the day of the soirée. Not even close. So, Gerard muttered, brow furrowed, how did he get in? Poirot responded, but perhaps, mon ami, we asked the wrong question. It is not how he entered. It is why he was seen at all. The inspector blinked. Poirot continued, suppose the figure everyone assumes was Paul Garnier was someone else entirely. Not an outsider, but someone already among us. In disguise. Gerard looked skeptical. Wouldn't someone have recognized them? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Disguise, Inspector, is not merely a matter of costumes. It is a matter of expectations. We see what we are told to see. To prove his point, Poirot took to reviewing the seating chart of the soirée again. The guests had been meticulously placed. Each seat, each course, each toast. But what about the gaps? Were any moments unaccounted for? Any guests who vanished temporarily? Yes. 2. Isadora Quinn, who had reportedly gone to freshen up her makeup midway through the performance. And Lucien Devereux, who claimed a brief escape for a cigarette in the alley behind the opera kitchen. Both had left. Both had returned quietly. Neither had been questioned further. Poirot wrote their names again on a small notepad, drew a line between them, and circled both in a single loop. Later that morning, Poirot walked alone through the west wing of the hotel, where a collection of retired theatrical props was stored. With the help of Celeste Marchand, who now trusted him enough to unlock even the storerooms, Poirot examined costumes, wigs, and facial prosthetics used during charity gala performances hosted in years past. He discovered a black waistcoat bearing the embroidered initials PG. Not Paul Garnier, Pierre Giraud, a stagehand who had died nearly 2 years prior. A reused costume. Poirot asked aloud. Celeste paled. It was used during last spring's masquerade. Someone could have borrowed it. Or stolen it. Poirot ran his finger across the worn gold stitching. The initials had been faded by time, but not erased. That evening, as guests gathered for another formal dinner, Poirot deliberately arrived late. From the back of the dining room, he observed where people sat today, how they looked, who leaned in close. Lucien Devereux, animated and laughing too loudly. Isadora Quinn, quieter than usual, her gaze flickering to Poirot and away again. Celeste Marchand, standing stiff behind the wine service, her hands trembling as she poured. At dessert, Poirot stood and gently tapped his glass with a fork. The sound rang sharp through the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I beg your pardon, but I must ask a favor. A reconstruction. I wish to restage a moment of the crystal soirée. Murmurs passed like a wave. Inspector Gerard rose slowly. Poirot. The detective held up a hand. There will be no accusations. Not yet. Only truth, as seen through performance. He directed the guests to remain seated as he arranged a silver tray on the sideboard, identical to the one used during the fatal toast. He summoned a staff member to bring 5 identical champagne glasses. Then, Poirot selected Lucien. "You shall stand in for the waiter." Lucien blinked. "Me?" "Yes. You know the scene well. You wrote about it." With a shrug, Lucien stepped forward. Poirot positioned him near the door. Then he looked at Isidora. "Mademoiselle, you will play Madame Evelyne again." She hesitated, but obeyed. As the two moved into place, Poirot directed them with a gentle but firm hand, guiding each step. "Now," he said softly, "walk the exact path. Deliver the tray. Toast. Sip." They did. Poirot leaned to Gerard. "Watch their eyes. Their comfort. Their fear." At the moment of the toast, Lucien's hands twitched. Isidora's lip trembled. Poirot clapped once. "Encore." But this time, switch roles. Gasps. Isidora served. Lucien drank. The room fell silent. And then Poirot whispered, "One more truth. The poison was not delivered during the toast. It was already in Evelyne's glass before it left the tray." He turned to the assembled guests. Only one person had access to the tray before the service, and knew how to disguise themselves as the waiter, disappear without question, and leave no trace. He walked towards Celeste Marchand. "Madam, shall we speak privately?" Her knees buckled before she could answer. The room erupted in confusion. Poirot caught her gently and nodded to Gerard. "Let us be kind. She has carried this too long." The guests were dismissed. Poirot sat with Celeste in the music salon, its candlelight flickering across her pale face. She confessed, but not to murder, to Faye. She had seen someone slip a vial near the glasses before the toast, someone she recognized, but refused to name. She had remained silent, believing Evelyne had earned enemies and death. But guilt had consumed her. Poirot did not press her name. Not yet, because the stage was nearly set. But the villain had not yet stepped forward. Chapter 7. The Echoes of Evelyne. Dawn rose slowly over Paris, slicing the horizon with the pale blade of morning light. The Hôtel du Palais Garnier stood motionless in its grandeur, a palace temporarily held hostage by grief and doubt. Within its ornate walls, the whisper of scandal now stirred behind every velvet curtain, and Hercule Poirot, ever methodical, moved through these shadows like a surgeon navigating delicate tissue, careful not to damage what still lived. Celeste Marchand had spoken, not of guilt, but of knowledge withheld. Her fear had twisted her silence into complicity. But Poirot understood fear. It was rarely criminal. More often, it was the curtain drawn by the innocent to shield themselves from danger. In the small breakfast salon, Poirot sipped coffee with barely a trace of warmth. Across from him, Inspector Gerard read the transcript of Celeste's interview, his brow furrowed. She claims to have seen the moment the poison was introduced, yet refuses to name the person responsible. Poirot nodded slowly. That is because she doubts what she saw, or perhaps she fears what naming the person would mean. Gerard frowned. She said it was during setup, that someone from the soirée slipped something into the champagne. Poirot replied, "OUI, but not from malice alone. This crime, I believe, was not committed in anger. It was composed. Like music." Gerard set the file down. "Then who composed it?" Poirot stood. "Let us ask Evelyne." The suite once occupied by Evelyne Devereux had remained sealed since her death, at Poirot's request. That morning, accompanied by the hotel's manager and Inspector Gerard, he entered it for the first time since the tragedy. It smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. A woman's sanctuary, preserved in silence. The bedroom was immaculate. But Poirot's attention turned to the writing desk in the corner. It was there he found it, a letter written but never posted, folded between the pages of a poetry book, addressed to someone named only as M. You promised me safety. You promised you would disappear. But you're still here, haunting the edges of my life. I will not be blackmailed again. If you approach me at the soirée, I will expose you. No signature, just that single letter. M. Poirot handed the letter to Gerard. It seems Evelyne had begun to resist her shadow. They moved next to her armoire, where hidden beneath a false drawer, Poirot discovered a small collection of personal effects. An old newspaper clipping featuring a young Evelyne and a masked conductor, a broken locket with a torn photograph inside, and a silver pill case bearing the inscription CL. Poirot froze. The same initials from the Marseille letter. He turned to Gerard. Find out who knew her during her conservatory days, particularly anyone with those initials, and look closely at those who funded her early tours. Some debts are paid in silence. That evening, Poirot called upon General Walthergrun. The retired officer welcomed him with stiff courtesy. You once offered Evelyne patronage, Poirot began, but it was not financial, was it? Grun did not flinch. I offered protection from someone who threatened her career, a man from her past. Do you know his name? Grun hesitated. I knew only the code she gave him, M. She said he knew how to hide among society, like a chameleon. Poirot's mind sharpened. And where is this man now? Grun's eyes narrowed. You must ask your journalist friend. He knows all the ghosts. Later, Poirot requested a quiet meeting with Lucien Devereux. The journalist arrived in a silk scarf and immaculate cuffs, carrying a notebook he never opened. Poirot wasted no time. Who is M? Lucien smiled. So many MS in Paris, monsieur. M for mystery, for memory, for murder. Poirot remained still. You knew him. I believe you protected him. Until Evelyne threatened exposure. Lucien's mask slipped, just briefly. She became cruel in her later years. Elegant, but cruel. She believed she could break her puppets without consequence. You were one of them. I was the one who cut the strings. Poirot let the silence stretch. Finally, Lucien whispered, there was a man. Charles Laurent, a conductor. They said he disappeared. But he didn't. He became someone else. Poirot leaned in. Who? Lucien stood. I've already said too much. With that, he left. But he had given Poirot what he needed. Charles Laurent. CL. The musical handwriting. The pill case. The unmailed letter. A man Evelyne once loved or feared. Perhaps both. Poirot now turned his attention to the gala photographs. He compared facial features, guest by guest, staff by staff. He narrowed it down. One face matched the lines of the torn photograph. A face that had aged, but not disappeared. The face of the hotel's night pianist. A man known simply as Marcel. Poirot returned that night to the Grand Lounge, when Marcel played soft arpeggios as the guests drank brandy. The music was impeccable, but Poirot heard the pain between the notes. He approached the piano. Marcel looked up. Their eyes met. Poirot said gently, Charles Laurent, I presume. The man's hands faltered. Poirot continued, You loved her. She trusted you once. But something changed. She threatened to expose you, perhaps for something long buried. Marcel, Charles, whispered, she wanted to be free. I wanted to disappear. She gave me both options, but I could not let her do it. Poirot asked, So you took her life? No, he said. I took her past. Poirot froze. Then who poisoned her? Marcel looked toward the shadows. She was already dying. From regret. I only helped her vanish. Poirot understood then. The poison had not come from hatred. It had come from mercy. But mercy delivered by whom? Poirot would not sleep that night, for the final mask had not yet dropped, and the crystal soirée still held one final encore. Chapter 8. The Glass Before Midnight. It was well past midnight when Hercule Poirot resumed his investigation, but the hour suited him. Mysteries often revealed their secrets in the quiet, in the long spaces between day and dawn. And tonight, the Hotel du Palais Garnier seemed more than ever like a theater between acts. Its chandeliers dimmed, its hallways emptied of all but memory and echo. The pianist, Charles Laurent, Marcel, had named no killer. Yet he had drawn back the velvet curtain to reveal a hidden play of fear and favor, of debt and devotion. Evelyne's past was no longer a mystery. It was a mosaic of broken promises and buried names. And Poirot knew that the killer was not a ghost. He, or she, walked among them still, smiling, grieving, lying. Poirot returned to his suite, where the photographs and documents had been carefully laid across his writing table. He poured a cup of lukewarm tisane and sat before them like a general before battle. He studied the photo of the crystal soirée once more. Faces frozen mid-laughter, hands mid-toast. Somewhere in that image was a moment, the precise moment the fatal glass changed hands. He called Inspector Gerard at once. "Meet me at the ballroom," Poirot said. "Bring the projectionist." Within the hour, the two men stood in the grand hall, now emptied of all but its colossal chandelier and faintly polished floors. The projectionist, a nervous young man named Antoine, set up his equipment, and soon the photographs and short reels from the soirée flickered to life on the white wall. Poirot watched each frame as if it were a symphony score. He said suddenly, "Stop." The image froze. The guests were raising glasses in salute. Evelyne stood in the center, smiling. Beside her, Armand Lefebvre, her former husband. But Poirot was not looking at him. He pointed to a figure in the background. A waiter. Enhance that section. Antoine zoomed in. The face was slightly obscured. But Poirot didn't need it. He focused instead on the tray. 5 glasses of champagne. But Evelyne was holding a 6th. Where did that come from? Poirot whispered. Gerard leaned forward. Are you suggesting she took the wrong glass? Poirot shook his head. No, I believe she took the right one. The one meant for her. He studied the angle. That glass was handed to her directly, not from a tray. Gerard looked startled. By whom? Poirot turned. That is the question, mon ami, and I believe the answer is hidden in the guest list. They returned upstairs. Poirot demanded the original seating chart and RSVP records. Line by line, he cross-referenced signatures with facial recognition from the photographs. One by one, they accounted for every guest, until one name remained unmatched. Victor Molyneux, Poirot read aloud. Gerard frowned. He never appeared in any photo. None, said Poirot, because he does not exist. Gerard blinked. Then who RSVP'd under his name? Poirot placed the RSVP beside a known letter written by Isadora Quinn. The handwriting was a match. The young soprano. Poirot wasted no time. He requested her presence in the hotel's music room once more. She arrived precisely on time, her eyes wide but unreadable. You knew Evelyne was afraid, Poirot said. You knew she had enemies. And you also knew she had weaknesses. Isadora replied coolly, we all did. Poirot walked toward the grand piano, touching the keys softly. You wanted her place. On the stage. In the spotlight. In the legacy. She tilted her head. That's quite an accusation. Poirot turned to face her. You wrote to her, pretending to be someone else. You created Victor Molyneux. You infiltrated her circle under a false name. And on the night of the soirée, you ensured that you, not a waiter, not a ghost, would hand her the fatal glass. Silence. Then she laughed, lightly. You think I'd kill her for a spotlight? Poirot stepped closer. I think you believed she would never step aside, and that the world had room for only one star soprano. I think you watched her suffer, publicly, quietly, and you decided to end the final act yourself. Isadora's voice dropped. She was going to expose someone. Not me, but someone I loved. Charles Laurent, Poirot said. She nodded. He was a reason I entered music. My teacher, my compass. Evelyne threatened him, said she would expose his past, said I was nothing more than his puppet. Poirot asked, so you silenced her? Tears welled in her eyes. She ruined lives. Even in dying, she held power. I gave her peace. And him, safety. Poirot said nothing. The truth hung heavy, like the final note of a tragic aria. He turned to Gerard. She must be arrested, but gently. Let her finish her performance tomorrow night. For the public. Then quietly, backstage. Gerard nodded. What will you do? Poirot folded his hands. I will attend. For one last encore. And thus, the mystery of the crystal soirée had found its villain. Not in rage or greed, but in devotion twisted by desperation. As dawn finally broke, Poirot stood once more at the window of his suite. Paris glowed golden gray. Another case closed. Another mask removed. And somewhere below, a young woman prepared to sing, for the last time, as a free soul. Chapter 9. Curtain Call at the Palais Garnier. Dawn broke like a delicate aria over Paris. The rooftops shimmered with dew, and the long shadows of the Palais Garnier cast a reverent hush across the square. From the window of his suite, Hercule Poirot watched the city awaken, its rhythm gentle and inevitable. Yet within the grandeur of the hotel, a quiet tension hung like an unsung note. The crystal soirée had ended in death, and now it would conclude with a final performance. Poirot reviewed his notes with surgical precision. The facts had been established. Isidora Quinn had created a false identity, infiltrated Evelyne Marchand's inner circle, and poisoned her with a glass of champagne. But as Poirot often reminded himself, facts alone were not enough. One needed understanding. Why had Isidora chosen such a public venue? Why perform the murder in a room full of witnesses? Why poison, and not something swifter? Each question whispered a motive far deeper than ambition. Poirot made his way to the opera house. The Palais Garnier was quiet, but not still. Inside, preparations were underway for that evening's tribute concert, a celebration of Evelyne's life and voice to be performed by those closest to her. The irony was not lost on Poirot. Backstage, he found Inspector Gerard seated beside the stage manager, reviewing security plans. We allow her to sing. Gerard asked again. Poirot nodded. Let her finish what she began. But keep your men at every exit. This is not the final act, yet. Gerard frowned but complied. Poirot wandered through the wings, pausing at the velvet curtains. He imagined Evelyne here, once flawless in voice and posture, commanding every breath in the room. What ghosts clung to this theater? What promises made and broken beneath its glittering dome? Celeste Marchand was seated in the audience, her black veil drawn low. She nodded curtly as Poirot passed, a woman carved from granite, mourning more than just her sister. Evelyne had been her legend, her shadow, her rival. And now, her absence echoed louder than applause. At noon, Poirot sat down with Charles Laurent. The pianist was subdued, his fingers twitching as though aching to play. You knew, Poirot said softly. You suspected what Isidora would do. Charles stayed at the keys. I hoped I was wrong. She loved you. Yes, more than she should have. I gave her music. She gave me everything. And Evelyne. Charles exhaled. Evelyne was never kind. She could destroy with a look. I owed her no loyalty. Poirot studied him. But Isidora did. And she betrayed it. Charles looked away. She believed it was justice. As evening fell, the theater filled with society's finest. Nobility, critics, composers, patrons. all eager for one final evening of remembrance. Poirot took his seat in the box above the stage, his view unblemished. Gerard was across the hall, eyes alert. The lights dimmed. The orchestra began. Isadora Quinn stepped into the spotlight. Clad in deep violet, she looked every inch the rising star. Her voice, when it came, was flawless, liquid and luminous. The audience held its breath. Poirot did not applaud. He listened, because somewhere in the melody, he heard it, not the voice of a prodigy, but of a confession. Halfway through the performance, Poirot stood and quietly made his way backstage. He found Isadora alone, just off stage, between arias. "You sang beautifully," he said. She turned, startled. "Monsieur Poirot, I didn't expect. Forgive the intrusion, but your voice, so full of regret." She said nothing. "Do you know what Evelyne once said to me? That the stage is a sanctuary, but also a confessional." Isadora lowered her gaze. "It is both." Poirot approached gently. "You wrote letters as Victor Molyneux. You orchestrated her death. And tonight, you sing not for Evelyne, but for your own absolution." She blinked, tears shimmering. "Then let me finish. One more song, please." Poirot nodded. She returned to the stage. The final aria was Evelyne's signature piece. As Isadora sang, Poirot watched the crowd. Watched Charles. Watched Celeste. Each face held something buried. Longing. Regret. Relief. When the music ceased, the applause thundered. Rosies fell from balconies. And then, Gerard stepped onto the stage. He walked to Isadora and whispered. Her shoulders sank. She bowed once. The curtains fell. Later, Poirot sat alone in the empty theater. Gerard joined him. She didn't resist. "No," Poirot said, because in her heart, she had already surrendered. Gerard sighed. "Why do they always confess in song?" Poirot smiled sadly. "Because music, mon ami, is the voice of the soul, and the soul, no matter how stained, seeks to be heard." Chapter 10. The Final Note. The night after Isadora Quinn's arrest passed over Paris like a hush after thunder. Within the halls of the Palais Garnier, the sweeping arches and grand chandeliers gleamed, but the air held a quiet grief. The applause had faded, the rosies had withered, and the legend of Evelyne Marchand had been sealed beneath layers of tragedy, music, and betrayal. Hercule Poirot did not sleep. At dawn, he walked the promenade outside the hotel, cane in hand, mind spinning. Justice had been served, so it seemed, but something within him stirred uncomfortably. A detail, out of place, a piece of the puzzle that remained shadowed. He returned to his suite, where he kept a meticulously ordered record of every moment from the soirée. Notes, photos, seating charts, testimonies. One item remained on the desk, a guest book, a thick volume signed by attendees as they entered the crystal soirée. He had dismissed it before. Now, he opened it anew. Line after line, flowing script, bold flourishes, names familiar and strange. Then he saw it. Armand Lefebvre. The name was there, but the signature, he had seen it elsewhere. Poirot retrieved a contract from Evelyne's archives, a deed signed by Armand when transferring ownership of a villa they once shared. The signature did not match. He paused. Could it be forged? He reached for the RSVP list again. Armand Lefebvre had returned to Paris just days before the event. He had given an interview to Le Figaro, and yet, no photograph from the soirée captured him clearly. Always in profile, often turned away, always near the edge of the frame. Poirot stayed out the window. What if the true impersonator had not been Isadora Quinn, but someone else? What if the trap set for Evelyne was lead? He summoned Inspector Gerard. "We have made an error," Poirot said. Gerard blinked. "The confession was sincere," Poirot interrupted. but incomplete. Isadora handed the glass, but she did not prepare it, nor did she plan the soirée. Someone else moved behind her, quietly, carefully, with precision. You believe someone used her? Poirot nodded, like a note played to distract from the true melody. They returned to the hotel ballroom. Poirot walked the room in silence, stopping before a portrait of Evelyne that had been hung for the concert. Armand Lefebvre, he murmured. Gerard said, "You think he never returned to Paris?" "No," Poirot said. "I think he returned as someone else." He tapped the photograph from the soirée. The man they believed to be Armand was always near the pianist, always watching Isadora, but never speaking. Poirot sent for Charles Laurent. The pianist arrived with visible hesitation. Poirot gestured for him to sit. "You knew Isadora would be arrested, and you allowed it." Charles replied, "She confessed. What could I do?" Poirot leaned forward. "Tell me about Armand Lefebvre." Charles frowned. "Evelyne's ex-husband. I only met him once, years ago." Poirot nodded. "Describe him." "Tall, silver hair, Italian shoes, arrogant." Poirot placed a photo before him. "Is this the man you saw at the soirée?" Charles hesitated. "Looked different. Thinner. No silver hair. But it could be age." Poirot tapped the glass. "Or it could be disguise." He stood. "Monsieur Laurent, who funded the soirée?" "Celeste," he said quickly. "Celeste Marchand." Poirot's gaze darkened. He returned to his suite and dialed a private number. Within the hour, he was seated opposite Celeste in her penthouse apartment. "Why did you pay for the soirée, madam?" Celeste sipped her tea slowly. "It was for Evelyne, a tribute, and to bring her enemies close." Her hand froze. Poirot pressed. "Why did you allow Isadora to perform? Why not cancel after Evelyne's death?" She stayed into her cup. "Because Evelyne would have wanted the music to continue." Poirot stood. "You miss her, but you also feared her, didn't you?" Celeste said nothing. Poirot reached into his coat. He laid down 2 photographs, one from the soirée, one from a villa in Nice. The same man, different identities. Armand Lefebvre never returned. He died in Corsica 2 months ago, but someone assumed his name. Celeste whispered, "You don't know who he was." "None," Poirot said. "But you do." She looked up, finally breaking. "He was my son." Poirot did not flinch, and Evelyne was going to reveal him. Celeste nodded slowly. "He was illegitimate, born from a scandal, hidden for decades. She learned the truth and threatened to destroy us." Poirot's voice softened. "So you let him attend. In disguise. You let him plan the soirée. And he prepared the drink." Celeste wiped a tear. "Isadora didn't know. She only knew Evelyne was dangerous. My son, he thought it was justice." Poirot said nothing. He stood and walked to the window. The city stretched before him, endless and ancient. "What will you do?" she asked. Poirot turned. "Tell the truth, as gently as I can." That evening, Isadora was quietly released. Poirot sat beside her in a quiet salon. "You were used," he said, "but you are not blameless." She nodded. "I know. Do you still wish to sing?" "Yes," she said, "but for different reasons." Poirot looked away. "Then sing, but never forget the cost of silence." And so, in the wake of scandal and sorrow, Paris moved forward. The Palais Garnier reopened. New voices rose, and Poirot, ever the observer, took his leave. The crystal soirée had ended, but its echoes would remain, shimmering like glass in the memory of those who danced too close to the truth. The rain returned to Paris with a soft relentlessness, as though the city itself wished to cleanse the air of what had passed. Clouds folded low over the rooftops of Montmartre, and the Seine shimmered in shades of pewter. Hercule Poirot sat in the tea room of the Palais Garnier, where once laughter had danced beneath chandeliers. Now, there was only quiet. Across from him, the theater's director arranged the final program. The concert was to begin at dusk, a tribute not to Evelyne Marchand, but to those left behind in the wake of her tragedy. A requiem of sorts, sung not in mourning, but in understanding. Poirot glanced at the folded letter in his hand. It was written by Isadora Quinn, delivered to his suite that morning. She would perform again, she said, not in defiance of what she had done, but because of it. She had chosen not to disappear into shadow. She would sing, not to forget Evelyne, but to remind herself of everything the great soprano had been. He closed the letter. The city moved forward, as it always did. But Poirot remained seated, his thoughts curling inward. The mystery had ended, publicly, officially. The authorities had made no arrest for the tampering of the champagne. The death had been ruled an accident, cloaked in ambiguity and compassion. Celeste Marchand's son had vanished into the folds of Europe once more, and no one dared speak his name aloud. Yet Poirot knew, and knowing, he found no triumph. For all his brilliance, all his order, he could not return life to the dead. Asterisk, asterisk. That evening, the great opera house welcomed its guests again. This time, the velvet carpets were rolled with a gentler hand. The ushers spoke in hushes. The gold leaf on the balconies seemed dulled by dusk. Poirot entered not as a detective, but as an old man in search of peace. He took his seat alone, in the same private box he had once shared with Evelyne for her final performance. Below, the stage was washed in soft amber light. Isadora Quinn stood beneath it, no longer the ingenue trembling for approval. She wore a simple black gown, her hair pulled back, her expression composed. Her eyes met Poirot's only once, not in apology, but in acknowledgement. The orchestra began, and she sang, not with the fire of ambition, but with the stillness of someone who had walked through loss and returned changed. The aria, once Evelyne's, now lived again. Poirot closed his eyes, and in the melody, he heard not guilt, not confession, but the echo of choices made in desperation and love. He saw Evelyne, not as the victim of a crime, but as a woman undone by her own truths. He saw Isadora, not as a killer, but as a soul caught in a current far beyond her depth. And Celeste, a mother who had silenced the past to protect a future that no longer existed. Asterisk, asterisk. Later, as the applause rose and fell like a tide, Poirot slipped quietly away. He did not linger backstage. He did not seek a final word. He returned to his suite. There, he placed one final note into his casebook. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the decision to let a curtain fall without applause. He closed the casebook. The crystal soirée was over. Asterisk, asterisk. A week later, Poirot boarded a train bound for the coast. He carried no suitcase, only a walking stick and a small box of clippings from the newspapers. The headlines had moved on. A new scandal in the Riviera. A missing heir in Vienna. Evelyne Marchand's death had already begun its fade into legend. As the countryside blurred past, Poirot watched in silence. His reflection stayed back in the glass, mustache precise, eyes unreadable. He did not smile, but nor did he frown, for in the echoes of tragedy, he had found what he always sought. The truth, not just of the crime, but of the people, the music, the shadows left behind. The case is closed. The soirée is over, and the echoes of that fateful night have drifted into silence, like the last note of a forgotten aria. Thank you for joining us, and subscribe to Moonlight Stories, and unlock the truth hidden in every shadow.